I'm 81 years old, and I'm about to tell you about the most expensive lie I ever told. Not expensive in money, expensive in years, in connection, in the kind of intimacy that makes a marriage actually worth having. The lie was simple. I'm fine. 3 words I said thousands of times over 3 decades to keep the peace in my marriage, and my wife believed me. Or maybe she didn't, but she was telling the same lie. So we had an unspoken agreement not to dig deeper. We were so good at being fine that we spent 33 years married and barely knew each other. I'm talking about the kind of strangers who share a bed, a mortgage, and absolutely nothing real. And here's the part that haunts me now. We thought we were doing it right. Thought avoiding conflict meant we had a good marriage. Thought not fighting was the same thing as being happy. We were so proud of never raising our voices that we didn't notice we'd stop saying anything that mattered at all. By the time we figured it out, by the time we finally started telling the truth, I was 78 and she was 76. And we'd wasted the best years of our lives pretending everything was fine when nothing was. Her name is Barbara. We got married in 1973 when I was 28 and she was 26. Met at a church social, dated for 11 months. Got married because that's what you did, and for the first few years, it was actually good. Not fireworks and passion. We weren't those people, but comfortable, easy. We liked each other, made each other laugh, had the same basic vision for life: house, kids, stability, maybe a dog. The problems started small. So small I didn't even recognize them as problems. In 1976, Barbara wanted to go back to school to become a nurse. She'd been working as a secretary, but had always dreamed of health care. She brought it up one night over dinner, excited, talking about programs and schedules, and I, without even thinking, said, "But what about the kids?" We didn't have kids yet, but I was thinking ahead, planning, being practical, and I saw her face fall, saw the light go out. But instead of saying what she really felt, she just said, "You're right, it's not practical." And I said, "We'll figure it out later." That was the first lie. Not a malicious one, just a small sacrifice for peace, for practicality, for not rocking the boat. And it worked. We didn't fight, didn't have conflict, just moved on, had dinner, watched TV, went to bed. Everything was fine, except Barbara never brought up nursing school again. And I never asked. Here's a lie we tell ourselves about keeping the peace: that avoiding conflict is the same as having harmony. That if nobody's yelling, everything must be okay. That smoothing over disagreements and swallowing your truth is what mature adults do. We believe this because confrontation is uncomfortable, because honest conversations about needs and disappointments and resentments require vulnerability. And vulnerability feels dangerous when you're trying to build a stable life. So we learn to lie. Small lies, mostly. I'm fine with that. It doesn't matter. Whatever you want. I'm not upset. And we tell ourselves these lies are generous, that we're being flexible, accommodating, easy to live with. But here's what we're actually doing. We're building a marriage on a foundation of unspoken resentments and unmet needs. and that foundation will eventually crack. It always does. The question is just whether you figure it out in time to rebuild, or whether you wake up at 78 realizing you've been living with a stranger for 33 years. The lies compounded. In 1979, we had our first child, Michael. Barbara had a difficult pregnancy and an even harder delivery. Postpartum depression hit her like a freight train. But in 1979, in our community, you didn't talk about that. You just pushed through, she'd cry in the bathroom. I'd hear her but pretend I didn't because I didn't know what to say and I was terrified of saying the wrong thing. One night I asked if she was okay. She said, "Just tired." I said, "Get some rest." And we left it at that. She needed therapy, needed medication, needed her husband to see her struggling and insist on getting help. But I took "I'm fine" at face value because addressing the truth would have required confronting scary things, would have required me to admit I had no idea how to help her, would have meant conflict with her mother, who thought depression was just weakness. So I let it go, kept the peace, and Barbara suffered alone for 8 months before it finally lifted on its own. She never forgot that. I didn't know that until 42 years later. In 1983, I got offered a promotion that required relocating from Ohio to Texas. Better pay, better position, big opportunity. Barbara had finally made friends in Ohio after struggling for years. I had a community, a small part-time job she loved at a bookstore. Her parents were 2 hours away. I brought up the promotion over dinner, told her it was a great opportunity, asked what she thought. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "It's your career. You should do what's best." I heard that as agreement, as support, as "yes, let's do this." What I didn't hear, what I chose not to hear, was that she'd just asked me to read her mind, to hear what she wasn't saying, to recognize that "it's your career" wasn't enthusiasm. It was resignation. We moved to Texas in 1984. Barbara cried during the entire drive. I told myself it was just stress from moving, that she'd adjust, that everything would be fine once we settled in. She did adjust, eventually, made new friends, found a new bookstore. But something changed that year. She became quieter, more distant. When I'd ask if she was happy, she'd say, "Of course." But her eyes said something different, and I didn't push, because pushing would have meant admitting I'd prioritized my career over her community. Would have meant facing the possibility that I'd made the wrong choice. So I accepted, of course, and moved on. Kept the peace. Here's what happens when you build a marriage on lies. You stop being yourself. You become a carefully edited version of yourself, designed to avoid conflict and maintain equilibrium. And your partner does the same. You're both performing a marriage instead of living one. By 1990, Barbara and I had perfected the art of cordial distance. We were excellent roommates, divided household tasks efficiently, attended our kids' events together, had sex occasionally, scheduled, never fought, never yelled, never said anything that might disturb the carefully maintained peace. Our friends thought we had an ideal marriage. They never argue, people would say. So comfortable with each other. They didn't see that our comfort was just mutual avoidance, that we'd stopped asking each other real questions years ago, 'cause we were afraid of real answers. I didn't know what Barbara actually thought about politics, religion, what she wanted from the rest of her life. I knew her shoe size and her coffee order, and which TV shows she watched. I didn't know her dreams, her regrets, her fears, what kept her up at night, whether she was happy. And she didn't know me either. In 1997, my father died. Heart attack at 71. I was devastated. My father and I had a complicated relationship I had never resolved. He was critical, distant, impossible to please. And I'd spent my whole life trying to earn his approval. Never got it. Now never would. I went through the motions of the funeral. Came home. Barbara asked if I was okay. I said I'm fine, just tired. And that was it. We never talked about it again. She never pushed. I buried it. Kept functioning. Kept working. Kept being fine. But inside something broke. I started having panic attacks at night. Would wake up at 3 a.m. with my heart racing, feeling like I was dying. But I'd go to the bathroom, calm myself down, come back to bed. Barbara would ask in the morning if I'd slept okay. I'd say, great. You? And we'd go about our day. This went on for 2 years. 2 years of secret panic attacks, unprocessed grief, and I'm fine. Because admitting I was struggling would have meant being vulnerable, would have required my wife to see me as something other than the stable, reliable man I'd always been, would have meant asking for help, which felt like weakness. My friend David, we worked together for 15 years in Texas. He had a different kind of marriage. He and his wife fought constantly. Loud, passionate arguments about everything. Politics, money, parenting, where to go for dinner. It was exhausting to be around them. But one night in 1999, David and I were having drinks after work. I made some comment about how lucky I was having a peaceful marriage, not like his chaos. He looked at me funny. You think my marriage is chaos? I said. You fight constantly. He said we disagree constantly. But at least I know what my wife is thinking. At least we're honest with each other. That stuck with me. Made me uncomfortable. Because I realized I had no idea what Barbara was thinking most of the time. And more terrifying, I'd structured my entire life to avoid finding out. David's wife died in 2006. Cancer. 58 years old. At the funeral, David said something in his eulogy that gutted me. We had 40 years together, and I knew her completely. The beautiful parts and the difficult parts and everything in between. I wouldn't trade that honesty for anything. I thought about my marriage, 26 years at that point, and I didn't know my wife. Not really. Knew her habits and preferences, didn't know her soul. The cracks really started showing in our 60s. The kids were grown and gone. It was just Barbara and me in a two-big house in Texas, and without the buffer of parenting, there was nothing left to talk about. We'd have dinner together in complete silence. Not comfortable silence, empty silence. She'd read. I'd watch TV. We'd go to bed at different times. Have sex maybe twice a year. Never talk about the fact that we barely touched each other anymore. I'd think this is just what happens in long marriages. You settle into routine. It's normal. But normal doesn't mean good. Normal doesn't mean this is how it should be. In 2011, Barbara had a health scare. They found a mass on her ovary. Turned out to be benign. But for 3 weeks, we thought it might be cancer. And sitting in that doctor's office, waiting for results, I had this horrifying thought. If she dies, what would I actually miss? And I couldn't answer. I'd miss having someone in the house. I'd miss our routine. But would I miss her? The actual person she was? I didn't even know who that was anymore. She was fine. The mass was benign. We went home. She said, "That was scary." I said, "Yeah," and then we never talked about it again. Never talked about mortality or regrets or what we wanted from the time we had. Left, just went back to our routine. Back to being fine. Here's what nobody tells you about lying for peace. You're not actually creating peace. You're just postponing war. All those unspoken resentments, unmet needs, swallowed truth, they don't disappear. They accumulate. And eventually, the weight becomes unbearable. For us, it took until I was 78. 45 years of marriage. Most of it lived in parallel, rather than together. We were in our living room. She was reading. I was watching some documentary. And out of nowhere, she said, "Do you even love me anymore?" Not angry, just curious, like she was asking what I wanted for dinner. I was stunned. "Of course I do. Why would you ask that?" She put down her book, looked at me. "Because I don't think I love you, and I don't think I have for a very long time." My first instinct was to smooth it over, to say, "You're just having a bad day," to keep the peace. But something stopped me. Maybe I was just tired, tired of pretending, tired of being fine. So instead I said, "I don't know if I love you either. I don't think I even know you." And then we finally started telling the truth. Not that night. That would have been too much. But over the following weeks and months, he started having the conversations we should have had decades ago about Barbara's resentment over the move to Texas, about nursing school, about my father's death and how alone I'd felt, about her postpartum depression and how abandoned she'd felt when I didn't push her to get help, about the thousands of small moments where we both said fine when we meant something completely different. Some of those conversations were brutal. We'd go to bed angry for the first time in our marriage, would say things that hurt, things we couldn't take back. But here's what I learned at 78 years old. Conflict isn't the opposite of intimacy. Dishonesty is. All those years we'd congratulated ourselves on never fighting. We weren't keeping peace. We were keeping distance. The fights we finally had, painful as they were, brought us closer than we'd been in decades. Because we were finally being real with each other. Finally being seen. Barbara told me things I never knew. That she'd been desperately unhappy in Texas for the first 10 years. That she'd almost left me in 92, but didn't because she was afraid and didn't think she could support herself. That she'd had a brief emotional affair with someone at the bookstore in 1995. Never physical, but real feelings that made her question everything. That she'd spent years feeling invisible to me, like I saw her as a function rather than a person. Cook, co-parent, household manager, not a woman with her own needs and dreams and disappointments. And I told her things, too, about the panic attacks after my father died, about how lonely I'd felt even in a house with her and the kids, about how I'd thrown myself into work because it was easier than facing what was missing at home, about how I'd become the kind of man I swore I'd never become, just like my father, emotionally distant and impossible to reach. These conversations didn't happen over weeks. They happened over 3 years. We're still having them now. And here's the miracle. At 81 and 79, for the first time in 45 years of marriage, we actually know each other. I'm not going to tell you we're madly in love now and everything's perfect. We're not. We've wasted too much time for that. But we're honest. We're connected. We actually talk about things that matter. When I ask if she's okay, if she says fine, I push now. Are you actually fine, or are you just saying that? And she does the same for me. We've learned to have conflict. Small conflicts about daily stuff. Big conflicts about what we want from our remaining years. And instead of destroying us, it's brought us closer. Because now when we're okay, we actually mean it. It's not performance. It's real. But I'll tell you what haunts me. We could have had this the whole time. Could have had 45 years of actual intimacy instead of 3 years of it at the end. And we missed it. We missed our kids' childhoods being honest with each other. Missed traveling together as people who actually knew each other. Missed decades of the kind of partnership that makes aging less terrifying. Because we were so committed to keeping the peace that we forgot to build anything worth keeping. Let me tell you about Barbara's friend, Margaret. Margaret and her husband divorced after 30 years in 2008. Everyone was shocked. They seemed so stable, never fought, perfectly aligned. Turned out that was the problem. They'd both been lying for so long, they didn't even know who each other was anymore. When their youngest left for college, and it was just the two of them, they had nothing to say. Tried marriage counseling. The therapist asked them each to describe what the other wanted from life. Neither could answer. They were strangers living in the same house for 3 decades. The divorce was civil. Sad, but civil. Margaret told Barbara, I wasted 30 years being a nice wife instead of a real person. She was 62 when she finally got to start living, honestly. That's too late. And my nephew, my sister's kid, Jeremy, he got married at 25. His wife Emily is lovely, but I watched them at family dinners and recognized the pattern immediately. The way they'd smooth over disagreements, the whatever you want, and I'm fine with either, and never actually stating preferences. Both so desperate to be easy, agreeable, conflict-free. I pulled Jeremy aside last Christmas. Told him what I'm telling you now. Stop lying to keep the peace. It's not peace, it's just slow death. He looked uncomfortable, I said. But we're happy. I said, are you? Or are you just not fighting? He didn't answer. I hope he figures it out before he's 81. So what actually matters? What do you do if you're in a relationship where fine has become your most used word? You start telling the truth. Not the brutal relationship ending truth, necessarily. Just small truths. Instead of, I'm fine with either restaurant, say, actually, I'd prefer Mexican tonight. Instead of whatever you want to watch, say I'd really rather not watch another action movie. Instead of I'm not upset, try I am upset. And here's why. You stop treating your partner's feelings as more important than your own honesty. Because that's not generosity. That's just slow motion lying. You learn to have conflict. Small conflicts at first. About where to go for dinner, how to spend Saturday, whether to attend that event. Practice disagreeing about low stakes things, so when high stakes things come up, you know how to navigate them. You ask real questions and insist on real answers. Are you actually okay with this plan? What do you really want here? How are you actually feeling? And when they say fine, you say, I need you to tell me the truth. You stop congratulating yourself for not fighting. Conflict isn't a sign of a failing relationship. Dishonesty is. Some of the strongest couples I know now fight regularly, not destructively, but honestly. They disagree. They express needs. They don't pretend to be okay when they're not. And their relationships are deep and real because of it. You create space for your partner to be honest, even when it's uncomfortable. That means not punishing them when they express needs that disappoint you, not making them feel guilty for having feelings that complicate your life, not shutting down difficult conversations because they make you uncomfortable. You stop outsourcing emotional honesty. Barbara and I both did this. Complained to friends, siblings, anyone but each other. Built entire support networks based on my spouse doesn't understand me without ever giving our spouse a chance to understand. That's betrayal. If you're telling everyone but your partner about your marriage problems, you're part of the problem. You recognize that vulnerability is strength, not weakness. For 45 years, I thought being strong meant having it together, not burdening Barbara with my struggles. Being stable and reliable, but all I was being was distant and unknowable. Real strength is saying I'm not okay and I need help. Real strength is letting your partner see you completely, mess and all. And most importantly, you start now. Don't wait until you're 78 and realize you've wasted decades living with a stranger. Don't wait until your kids are grown and the buffer is gone and you're forced to confront what's been missing. Don't wait until a health scare or a crisis forces honesty. Start having real conversations today. Let me ask you something, and I need you to sit with this question. When was the last time you told your partner, or your parent, your best friend, whoever you're closest to, when was the last time you told them something true that was uncomfortable? Not the comfortable truths like, I love you or you look nice. The uncomfortable truths, I'm not actually fine. I resent that choice we made 5 years ago. I feel lonely even when we're together. I need something from this relationship I'm not getting. If you can't remember the last time, or if it's been months or years, you're not in an honest relationship. You're in a performance. And performances are exhausting. They're also lonely, because nobody actually sees you. They just see the character you're playing. Are you telling small lies to keep the peace right now? Are you saying fine when you mean something else? Are you avoiding conversations because they might cause conflict? Are you living in parallel with someone instead of actually connecting? Are you so focused on not fighting that you've forgotten to build something real? Stop lying to keep the peace. Stop saying you're fine when you're not. Stop swallowing resentments to avoid conflict. Stop accepting your partner's "I'm fine" without question. Stop congratulating yourself for never fighting. Stop treating honesty like it's dangerous. Start telling small truths, even when they're uncomfortable. Start having the difficult conversations today instead of letting them build for decades. Start asking real questions and insisting on real answers. Start viewing conflict as an opportunity for connection, not a threat to avoid. Start being vulnerable even when it feels scary. Start building a relationship based on truth instead of on carefully maintained peace. Start choosing intimacy over comfort. I'm 81 years old. Barbara is 79. If we're lucky, maybe we have 10 more years together. Maybe 15. Probably less. And we're finally, after 48 years of marriage, actually married to each other instead of to the idea of each other. We know each other now. We're honest now. We fight now. Small fights about whose turn to do dishes. Bigger fights about legacy and regrets and what we wish we'd done differently. And it's better. Everything is better when you stop lying. But I'll never get back those 45 years we wasted. Never get to raise our kids in a home where emotional honesty was modeled instead of emotional performance. Never get to travel in our 50s and 60s as people who actually knew each other deeply. Never get the kind of partnership that weathers difficulties together instead of separately. We have 3 years of real marriage after 45 years of pretend. That ratio is a tragedy. Here's the irony that kills me. We thought we were doing it right. Thought keeping peace meant we were good at marriage. Thought avoiding conflict was maturity. We were so proud of never fighting that we didn't realize we'd stopped connecting. And now, at the end of our lives, we finally figured out what we should have known at the beginning. Peace built on lies isn't peace. It's just slow disintegration. You want real peace? Real partnership. Tell the truth, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Because the hard conversations are the only ones that matter. Everything else is just weather reports and grocery lists. You have a choice right now. Keep lying to keep things smooth. Keep saying fine when you're not. Keep building a relationship on unspoken resentments and unmet needs. Or stop. Take the scary step of actual honesty. Have the uncomfortable conversation. Risk conflict to build intimacy. Because I promise you, the pain of honesty is temporary and manageable. The pain of waking up at 81, realizing you wasted your entire marriage being polite instead of real. That pain is permanent. If this resonates, if you recognize yourself in this story, I need you to do something today. Have one honest conversation with your partner, your parent, your friend, whoever you've been lying to for peace. Tell them one true thing you've been afraid to say. It doesn't have to be enormous, just real. Comment below and tell me what truth you've been avoiding. Maybe saying it out loud will give you the courage to say it to the person who needs to hear it. Subscribe because I have more of these truths to share, and not much time left to share them. Barbara and I are finally living honestly. Finally, really married. But we're on borrowed time. You're not? You still have years ahead of you. Don't waste them like we did. The clock is ticking for all of us. What lie are you telling right now?